Come on, turn the lights down low and sit with me in second row. Tonight they show the movie of your life, the heartache and the tragedy.
Welcome to Our Stories.
Thank you, Will Raver.
This is this is an old project of Thrive's, and I'm really happy to finally have your story being recorded.
Thank you. Well, thank you for thriving and all that thriving does and has done. And I think this is really important.
Could you tell us something a little about your early life, Stu?
I was actually born in Palo Alto in December 7th, 1940. And I actually brought my birth certificate, which is a piece of parchment from 1940. I could never find it, and all of a sudden here I am at 68 years old and I find the damn thing. Story of my life. Yeah, Mom and Dad were kind of cafe society couple from the Scott Fitzgerald era. They enjoyed their martinis, their dancing. San Francisco was a city that had the great hotels, the great bands. In fact, Merv Griffin started here at the St. Francis Hotel singing on the radio station KPOO, K-P-O-O-O. We had a lot of great big bands, and lots of the big famous bands toured here and played here. There were a lot of great nightclubs, lots of entertainment. So I was a lucky guy in that respect. But growing up in Palo Alto did not meet my needs. I was a city boy, and I hated the peninsula, hated all that. So at some point I got the chance to start taking the train up to San Francisco, and as a young guy going into the old jazz clubs and nightclubs, and I remember being put on Charles Pierce's knee in Gold Street in, I don't know when that was, the 60s, I guess. Late 50s, early 60s. He was a fairly young guy then, too. Goldman's Gay 90s at the opening of Broadway Street. It was just such a great, and always has been a great city. It's still a fascinating city with all sorts of the best in the arts and entertainment for such a small town. So I grew up down there, went to schools down there, was never a good student, took every opportunity in my life to cut out of school, go on my own, do things on my own. At that time, the word gay was often applied to my mom and dad, going out dancing. I remember they had a party one time, and Noel Coward was actually there, and he used the word gay probably 100 times during the dinner party. And what he meant was having a gay time. It was the Thin Man was a popular movie series, and the Little Dog Asta and the Big Tall Martinis, and it seemed like all people did was smoke and drink, and they made life very romantic. And so I always felt it was very ironic that, in later life when gay became, synonymous with homosexuality, that because my mom and dad could not deal with me being homosexual. If I was a priest, it would have been okay. If I was, a flamboyant hairdresser or show business type, it would have been okay. But they had no room for gay people in their lives. And even Palo Alto, which was supposedly a very liberal town, rated by Stanford University, primarily for their faculty and staff, known as one of the great educational cities, kind of a Berkeley of its time. And it was so, wasn't a black person in any of the schools I went to. I actually brought a little photo of my elementary school, which was Walter Hayes Elementary School. And I went there in 1945, right at the end of the war. And then I went through the Palo Alto School District, although I seldom graduated, but went through the Jordan Junior High School and then the Palo Alto Senior High School. And it was interesting. My dad actually died leaving one of the great bars and restaurants in San Francisco. It was called Ricky's. And John Rickey had a series of places, including the train station at 3rd and Townsend, which is where the train station used to be. And I remember one time taking the train up to San Francisco, and Jeanette McDonald and Gene Raymond were boarding the old Lark to go back to L.A. They must have had 50 pieces of luggage, and they're boarding this train, but they're coming out of the bar at the train station, which was Ricky's rendezvous. And but my dad was leaving Ricky's in Palo Alto, and the bar there one night in 1948 was killed by a drunk driver. And so at that point, I remember that night, my mom came up to me and she said, woke me up upstairs in my bedroom and said, Dad's gone to heaven. You are now the man of the house. I was 8 years old, and I had 2 younger brothers. And my mom had some problems of her own. She'd been, and I don't know the facts of any of this, so this is this is nothing terribly judgmental, and it's said without a lot of basis. So I'm speculating. My mom had been in a sanitarium before I was born for 2 years, and I had been told it was for tuberculosis, and I've since kind of found different kinds of evidence saying that she'd had a drug problem, and which was it was not unheard of in my family. And so it did turn out that she had a major drug problem, and after my dad died, it escalated. That was 1948, and then my best friend, whose father was a doctor with the old Palo Alto Medical Clinic, abruptly left town with his father, and his father, it turned out, had been sent to jail as a doctor for illegally prescribing medication, narcotics, and being addicted to them himself. So things kind of went downhill in that aspect, and then at some time, when I was about 16, I was confronted with a situation where her addiction was so bad, it was suggested to me that I authorize a prefrontal lobotomy on her, which I did, with the promise that it would cure her addiction, which it didn't. And so she wound up staying alive another 10 years, and from that point on, in my teens and then into college, and after, I kind of accommodated her to live next door to me in whatever housing I was in. Yeah, but we had nurses and all that stuff that lived at the home of being gay at that point. And so what I did do sexually was called anonymous sex, tea room, glory hole sex, and being at Stanford, there was a lot of it around there. And so I got into years of just anonymous sex. But I also started drinking voluminously, and that became a huge part of my life. When I started to feel sexually aroused, I would drink, thinking that would inhibit any sexual activity. And it did, actually, quite a bit. But I forgot that when things that I didn't remember usually were occurring in blackout. And so I was going out and looking for anonymous sex in blackouts for a long time. A series of events happened. I got very lucky in a business opportunity. In 1963, I took over a little tiny company down in Silicon Valley, which was still not Silicon Valley at that point, and it became a company later called Image Technology Incorporated, ITI. And I, through a series of mergers and acquisitions, developed it into a fairly large company. And I had, by this time, had come to the what I wanted to do was to retire before I was 30, and I have no idea why, and I had no plan of what I was going to do when I was 30, but that's what I wanted to do. And so I was running this business. I was CEO and board chair, and it was growing. And basically, I worked from 5 a.m. until noon, and then I'd go out to fancy French restaurants and drink and eat. I very seldom ate, but I did drink a lot. And I loved, I loved fancy French restaurants that treated me like a little king. So what happened was, my mom, I was living in Palo Alto, and I had a condo in a place on Raspadero Road in Palo Alto, and I had a large unit, and then I got the unit next to it for my mother, and my mother lived there and had her servants, or not her help, and I lived there, and I had a roommate who was a straight guy, and we never had sex, but we lived together, and he was the kind of guy who allowed me to do everything for him. So he worked for me. We lived together. I bought his clothes. I told him everything, you know.
In your outline, you referred to him as your hostage.
He was a hostage. He was my first hostage.
Interesting term.
Yeah. A wonderful guy. And, you know, he was straight as an arrow. His name was Kingsley, and real handsome guy. In 1967 or 68, I got sick, and it turned out it was meningitis. And I think this kind of plays into the later part of the story, because I almost died twice, and they did a lot of different things, including they drilled burr holes into my head and took a lot of fluids out and put things in, a lot of lumbar punctures. And at some point, I was at Stanford Hospital. They called in NIH, National Institute of Health people from Atlanta and DC. And I had been to Africa on a vacation, and they made a big deal out of this, and I didn't understand it, but I lost all my feeling and touch and balance and all of these things. I lost the ability to speak. And I kind of recovered, and then I had one more relapse with it. But in about a month that I was in the hospital, my poor hostage, who'd never dated in 8 or 10 years of living together, got married, and then my mom died. And I went into some kind of a nervous breakdown or something. I have no idea what it was. And I couldn't leave my home, you know, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't talk to people. And somehow I wound up seeing a shrink. And this doctor, who's a very, very good doctor, prescribed Thorazine for me. And the minute I got the first effect of the Thorazine, I felt like I was home. I just felt so good, such a relief. And I remember I left his office, and I was driving. I had just moved up to Woodside, or to Portola Valley, and I got into my car, and for the next 5 years, I could not drive with both eyes open at the same time. Thorazine was such a powerful, I don't know what you call it, it just kind of put me to sleep while I was awake. I didn't feel anything, and I was just so grateful for that. So I remember driving back home after seeing this psychiatrist and having this Thorazine. And so what I did was I never went back to the office, never went back to my business. And I sat around, or I traveled a little bit, and then I decided, I got involved with a little bar restaurant up in Portola Valley called the Alpine Inn. And I started thinking that I needed to do this. And so we eventually, I had taken care of my brothers all these years too. I got them each a business of their own. I bought them each a Shell gas station, and I helped them get married and all these things. And they lost those businesses pretty promptly, and so I was kind of like taking care of them. But they were married now, and they had children, and I had to have them doing something because I couldn't support them completely. And they would burn through money. We inherited some money too, and they were something else. And so I said, well, we'll buy some restaurants, and we'll go into that business because they're drunks and they'll be happy. You know?
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. And my logic for myself was too. You know, I was drinking so much by this point. I figured if I got into the bar restaurant business, no one could kick me out, and I wouldn't have to pay for my own drinks. And you know, booze was real cheap when you were buying it wholesale. And well, I had a great rationale.
Very practical.
Yeah. So I bought a place in bankruptcy in San Francisco called Harpoon Louis. Now all this time, I have steadfastly, whenever asked, told people that might say, Stu, are you gay? Absolutely not. How dare you ask me anything like that? Have I ever indicated in any way that I'm homosexual? You know, and of course I was, and I acted that way, but I didn't believe I did. So all I'm trying to point out by that is that I was truly into denial and truly into sick rationalizations about who I was and what I did. So I come up to San Francisco, I buy this, or take over this straight joint in the financial district, it becomes very, very successful. And then I go to the marina a lot. So I say, well, better get another place. So I got another place down and built a place called the Chestnut Street Grill. And I like to go to Tiburon, so I bought a place called 39 Main in Tiburon, and I loved it because we had Dixieland on Sunday afternoons, and it was just a lot of fun. Then my drinking increased. I started having some problems. I did find a lover, the one and only lover I've ever had. We were together 7 years, and he had just graduated from Cal. I was 37, and he was 22. We got together, and I was pretty happy, but I had never been with anybody, so I didn't know what the hell you do in a relationship. We'd have sex once in a while, but he was an artist, and we had very little in common, but I really tried to make that work, and in my mind, working would be that he would be happy with whatever I did, which he wasn't. Surprises, surprises. And I was unable to be monogamous, and we stayed together about 7 years, and I was drunk all the time, and I would cheat on him all the time, and he would catch me in the worst situation, embarrassing situations. And again, when I was conscious and aware, I didn't think I had any kind of sexual activity ever. It was always done in blackouts. So at any rate, in 1983, we had a major fight, and I broke this arm in the fight falling down the stairs. We had a beautiful home in Pacific Heights, and it was a compound fracture, and I was taken to the hospital, and I had a bunch of blood transfusions. And a couple of years later, wound up converting, becoming positive. And we didn't say that in those days, but I tested positive for HIV, and I was numb. I just couldn't believe it, because I really believed that I had never really had any sex except for this one guy, and I didn't think I'd ever done anything dangerous, anything. I'd never done anything that would put me at risk for that, and because it was such safe sex that it was practically not sex, and I hate to say it's always embarrassing, but frottage was big in my world. So I was stupefied, and so I didn't say or do anything for a while, but then
you said something you had retested. You actually
then I retested, and it was there, and I retested again, and I tried to sue. The first test had been done for an insurance physical for my business. My partner and I were getting buy-sell insurance, and so Transamerica was the company we went to, and they were also customers of mine. So the president of the company had it all done, and then all of a sudden I get this letter saying that I am positive, and I was livid. I couldn't believe it, and I went ballistic. I tried to sue Transamerica. I got a judge who was a friend of mine, and I said, "This is impossible. I can't believe it. I'm not gay, and here they're saying I have AIDS." Blah, blah, blah. So my immediate reaction was I said I was going to drink myself to death. I did not want to die with AIDS on my death certificate. And those early days, I just started making such terrible decisions about everything. My partner and I broke up. I did a lot of stupid things financially, and
you talked about losing several businesses.
Oh yeah, I lost pretty much everything, and then I was given another opportunity. I'd been a very successful promoter for Beck's Beer and Stolichnaya Vodka, so they gave me a territory between Lake Tahoe and Reno, and set me up in business. And basically, I had to increase the pennant market share of those two products and a number of other products in that market. So I had an unlimited expense account, and I had my home here in San Francisco, but I got a home in Lake Tahoe, and warehouses and trucks and all that stuff. And my job would be, starting in the morning, to go around to the hundreds of places that sold beer, wine, and liquor, and get my products placed there. And what I did was I carried in my car, I had cases of everything that I sold, and I would go to this place starting at 9 in the morning. I'd say, yeah, I'd like a Beck's beer. And they'd go, well, we don't carry it. I said, well, let me go out to my car, and I'd come out and I'd bring a case in, and I'd say, you do now, and that's not costing you a dime, and I'll buy everybody in the house the things. Or a Stolichnaya, drink or whatever, or whatever wine it was. And I got pretty close to 98% market saturation in the whole territory. Beck's had never been able to get into the casinos in Nevada, and I was able to do that. But of course, I was drunk by noon every single day. Very successful, but I couldn't even drive.
Believed in your product.
Loved my product. It was probably the largest consumer of them up in that area. But that too started to go. And I actually remember now that I had an experience with a guy up there in which I had, again, unsafe sex. And so I decided to have this time I couldn't deny what had happened, so I decided to have another test. And this one was 1988. And I had not done anything about my HIV. I'd really tried. A few people knew because I made such a big fuss about it earlier, or whenever it first happened. And so now when I got this test back, I remember going to, I think it was 18th Street Services, and I went to see a counselor there, and he invited me into a group. And I went into the group, and I was so drunk, he said, you can't stay while you're drunk. And I was just absolutely offended. How dare you, I have no reason not to be drunk, I was just so filled with myself about having this awful dread disease. And, so what happened was I started I remember I looked up Shanti, I looked up a whole bunch of places, and I wanted to learn about what was going to happen to me without having to ask anybody. So I started volunteering. I remember taking the Shanti training, and then I took the same training at Most Holy Redeemer. That was probably 91, 92, I don't remember. And all of this without ever asking. I would say, I'm going to die, and I want to know what it's going to be like to die. So I get trained in this and learn what all the different resources were. And I remember Shanti had the activities program, and I'm a little out of order here because when I went on disability, I'd also had other financial problems, so I was pretty poor, and then I was poor before I went on disability. But when I found the activities program, I was able to go see a lot of things that I hadn't been able to afford for a while. And I remember one of the things was Charles Pierce at the Plush Room. And Charles I got to know him a little bit again, now much older. And what he would do, which was so incredible, he played the Plush Room a lot. He would actually give us 50 tickets to every show, which is about half the room at the Plush Room, every single show for Shanti clients. And so I got to know him, and we would talk. He lived down in LA, and so he started talking to all these other people, and I got involved with the activities program because I really believed we needed to have more things like that for people with HIV. And as there was tons of volunteers in those days, so I wasn't acting alone. I don't want it to sound that way. But I just loved that program. And I just got more involved with Shanti, and I got more involved with Positive Resource. And the reason I got involved with Positive Resource was because I thought I was going to die, but I didn't want to die as broke as I was, because I was getting disability. And I think when I first went on disability, I didn't have private disability. I went on SSI, I think, or SD. I don't remember what exactly it was, but I remember my income from that was it was less than $600 a month. And but then I got a rent subsidy. And so I was able to do everything. but I couldn't afford to go to the theater, couldn't afford to go to lots of different things. So I got very involved with the activities program, and Hank was one of the first people I knew through Shanti, got to know. And he was, gosh, I don't know, I didn't know Hank well, but
Hank Wilson, right?
yeah, yeah, and he was doing the Ambassador Hotel, lots of different things, from helping people in so many different ways. He became one of my early role models. And so I don't know, it just started flowing. I got to Positive Resource Center, and computers were just starting to happen. And I was introduced by Mark Misrock, who was the only guy in the office, the second person that worked for Positive Resource, had been a woman person.
Rent subsidy, Ryan White, CARE Act, etc.
Yeah, geez, there were so many. I benefited greatly by starting to search for resources, and there were a lot out there by the time I was actually in need myself. As I mentioned earlier, Shanti was an important springboard for me, and through their training and then Most Holy Redeemer, I realized or came to see that we weren't necessarily all dying as quickly as I thought we were going to, that I was afraid we were going to. So, and through the work with Shanti and their activities line and things like that, I mean, hope was coming in, and it was coming in for a lot of us, I think. We still didn't have the medical breakthroughs, but we weren't dying as quickly as we had been. So I got this opportunity that then again through PRC, when they were in California in Van Ness, Mark Misrock, running the show all by himself, I was volunteering, and we had been donated 2 old computers, and I think they were like IBM 280s or something. They were really monsters. But what Mark saw, and I didn't know what a computer was at that point. I really didn't. I thought a computer was something they kept at the Pentagon, and it was 15 miles long.
It was.
So I next door to us at that place was a guy named Craig Newmark, and Craig was just starting to leave his business and create Craig's List. And he and Mark and I would talk sometimes, and he'd say, "Oh, you can't believe the things that are going to happen." And so Mark started realizing that if we could train people with HIV how to combine their typing skills or their administrative skills with the internet, which was just really starting to emerge, we could train people to either help themselves or at least to communicate more effectively. And boy, what a great opportunity that turned out to be. And I've been personally benefited over the years countless times from Positive Resource. I learned all the computer stuff for them. But through that initial experience, I was able to buy an old IBM 380 for myself. And I got an internet connection through AOL. I think this was 94. And in 95, I started, with a lot of help from a lot of other people, what's still on the internet now called the HIV/AIDS reference page. And what I tried to do was create just a list of links to every resource I could find. And at that point, there were 20 resources that had a website or a web presence. And so in the first 3 months, we had 77,000 hits, we used to call them. And and I was getting, I just talked with a guy last week named Fernando that found that from Mexico City. He was a young attorney. He was then 23 years old, living in Mexico City. He tested positive. The government fired him. He was a government attorney in Mexico City. His family disowned him. He saw the website. He started emailing me, and eventually he got to San Francisco, and eventually through a lot of other resources we had found, all of us had found, he was granted political asylum. And that started a whole new thing with the AIDS Legal Referral Panel and other AIDS legal resource agencies and Immigration and Customs and certain politicians locally who would be supportive and open to helping people in these circumstances. But that's one of many, many people who contacted me from that first website, which was just simply, it was my story and then a list of links about where all the different resources. So the computer was just this incredible thing. And So I now had stable housing. I was allowed to stay in my own apartment, and I believe at that point I went through Catholic Charities and a variety of different AIDS service organizations, and wound up getting Ryan White subsidy through the AIDS Foundation. And so I now had very stable housing, and I had Medicare, Medi-Cal, and so which meant really good health service. I was at Kaiser, and I was very unhappy with Kaiser. Roger, my good friend Roger McCodger, was a Kaiser participant at that point, I believe. And when Crixivan was first acknowledged, Kaiser would not give it to us. And there were a few people who became really hot under the collar and created a committee, or an advisory body that still exists to this day, I believe, and really has advocated and forced Kaiser to provide, medicines that we deserved. And eventually, people like Roger did get that for us. But I got on that board for a while, and then I was failing. All of my meds were failing, and so I read about another trial being done by a guy named Stephen Deeks over at Ward 86. And so I went to see him. I got in the trial, and it actually was a trial that was one of the things very much similar to Crixivan, and I didn't respond well to that. And I was actually an inpatient at San Francisco General. They have a ward over there that's strictly for some of the trials, and I was staying in the ward there for quite a while. And Dr. Deeks is best known as a salvage therapy guy, and so he did a bunch of stuff, and I got sicker, but then I started getting better, and so CSF talked to me about some problems they were having with some entertainment, fundraising, and I'm kind of all over the map, I think, but I'm trying to get to a certain point where my health now was getting better after going through a lot of meds that didn't work for me in a period where it was hard for all of us to get stabilized in our medicines, because the pharmaceutical companies were passing off all sorts of stuff, good and bad, and we had a lot of doctors who didn't have the information in which to treat people with HIV. There were a lot of doctors out there who weren't well advised about HIV. And so I was very lucky, and Dr. Deeks got me stabilized, and I actually started looking now for ways to get more involved, and maybe I kept getting better, so I wanted to make money. I was still very grateful, and I'm still grateful to this day for SSDI and SSI and the subsidies. I mean, I still get a subsidy to this day, and I hope I never lose it. But I got to a place where I wanted to do things, and I think in the early 90s there was a group formed that some of you may know of called Thriving, and I remember some early meetings of Thriving, and I think around 93, I'm not sure of the dates, there was a group that started getting together to talk about earning, recognizing the limitations that everybody had, and how could we do things to get back into the workplace.
Talking of thrivability.
Thrivability,
Yes,
absolutely. Absolutely. And
came out of Thrive in about 2003.
2003.
Yes.
Did I say 93?
93.
I told you, short-term memory. Yeah, around 2003, because 95 had been when I did the first thing, and then after that I started Baghdad by the Bay, which was going to be a news journal kind of online magazine.
A la Herb King.
A la Herb Cain, and that was his great book, Baghdad by the Bay, and the family authorized me to use that name, and we got a lot of people who were very supportive, people with HIV in the internet web design business to help put that together, and gosh, we were doing so good. And then there was another one called Post Talk that I got involved with. They allowed me to intern as a writer, and I became kind of a critic for them, and that really got a lot of stuff happening for me in terms of getting resources to put into some of these things to gain more resources for all of us. That was my thinking. And we had these meetings at Thrivability, which it's very hard, you know, that out of that today, last year we launched a company after 1 year of working with Mark Mizrak and Mike Lenhart, who some of you know, and 5 other guys, some who don't want to be known publicly because they're afraid that they'll lose their benefits. A company called Creative Core Design. And that is starting to become self-supporting. We're doing a lot of creative stuff. I'm one of the directors of that little enterprise. And, you know, that is another direct result of Thrivability. Another thing for me that is a direct result, personally, of Thrivability was Tim Panelli Productions. At one point, I started producing little concert events for Shanti as fundraisers. Had been asked to join their board of directors, and it's great to be a board of directors. Hank helped me with that. Hank Wilson helped me again with that too. I had no capacity to write a check, but I could maybe get some entertainers together and maybe get some to donate a room or something like that, and maybe a booze sponsor to help or whatever. And so I started doing these little hobnob things in the holiday season. And Roger the Codger was one of the first supporters of that, and everything else that I've done since then, including Tin Pan Alley. But Tin Pan Alley came about as a result of, again, of Thrivability, because I wanted to have a nonprofit that could produce these events and connect venues, nonprofits, sponsors, and audience, as well as performers, together through the internet, and they could all help each other. We create this database. So if Shanti was going to have a fundraiser, these entertainers are available, this venue's available, these caterers are available, all these different resources. And I wanted to get to a point through the sponsors would make sure that everybody got something, a stipend of some sort or some form of coverage for their expenses. Well, Craigslist again comes in, Craig Newmark again comes into this, because through Thrivability I contacted him and I said that I would like to do this idea. What did he think about it? And he said, well, strange you should ask. I'm just launching something called Craigslist Foundation, and we're going to do Craigslist Boot Camp. And I think 5 years ago he did his first nonprofit boot camp, which was in Fair. He did it at the Metreon Center. And gosh, there were so many people there, all wanting to start some kind of a nonprofit, and those who want to support some kind of a nonprofit. And so I was selected to do my pitch at that thing, and out of that came free legal services, all sorts of things to set the company up, you know, and or the nonprofit up. It's still going to this day, and it's actually like $5,000 in the bank account. I have not been able to produce anything for a year. And I just saw somebody in that board of directors today and said we have to do something. It's terrible to not have that money being used for something. And, so we will, you know. But that, again, is another thing that a gift, as far as I'm concerned, from HIV and all the people who've come together and developed resources, responded to need, done immense positive things that affect all of us, not just people with HIV. I mean, I remember when we started at Shanti, we kind of started taking in breast cancer, as has the AIDS Emergency Fund is now breast cancer, right? You know, I can't imagine a more significant response in the history of mankind to what we've gone through with HIV. And here we are, probably one of the most despised minorities in history, who've got probably the most passionate and effective response from a world that's hostile towards us, you know. And I remember those days when gay women in San Francisco, gay men in San Francisco. I mean, you could go somewhere and I remember the days of the BAR. There'd be 40 or 50 death notices in a weekly little paper, you know, and you knew them, you know, and you didn't know. I mean, how quickly, you know. And today, you know, I get to look around and I get to see a lot of people not only alive but thriving, and I mean really thriving. And I can't say enough about things like thriving, because, you know, when you can give a person hope and purpose and help them translate that into positive experience, that experience goes out to other people, all the people they're in contact with. So what about HIV? I mean, HIV for me has been a gift, and I mean, I don't mean that with any hypocrisy or any kind of a joke or any kind of a snide inference. I would have drank myself to death, which is fine. I got this disease, and I didn't know what to do. And somehow I was placed in situations that kept taking me to hope. And it's the hope I find everywhere that I never thought was there in the first place, So I think my life is immensely better than I ever dreamed it could be as kind of a result of getting the disease I thought would kill me. So, I'm one of those lucky guys. It's, and I have friends today that I never dreamed possible, and things, I mean, I like to do things, and we all do, and we do amazing things. I got Terry Beswick, I got to go see his play. I was just so happy to see that, and to see a whole bunch of people from Thriving going to see it, and a bunch of people I know in the whole community, we share all these things, together, and I love it. I don't know.
Well, that's an amazing story, and you've done a very good, incredible contribution to Thriving and to the gay community and HIV community in San Francisco. So really, really thank you for